As battles around Jerusalem's holiest site generally go, the weekend skirmishes were pretty mild, one has to admit. But such is the sensitivity of the site known to Jews as Har HaBayit, Temple Mount, and to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, that any clash there has the potential to trigger much greater violence elsewhere in the region and beyond. So what actually happened, and what's it really about? When Palestinian youths began throwing stones after last Friday's midday prayers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Israeli police poured into the holy area firing stun grenades and tear gas. The purpose, said the police, to nip the protests in the bud and to prevent the youths from stoning Jewish worshippers at the western wall below. That's Jewry's holiest existing structure, the outer wall of the holy compound, which itself sits atop a small plateau within Jerusalem's walled old city. The reason for the unrest was the start by Israel of archeological work as a prelude to the building of a new walkway leading up to the compound. A centuries-old stone and sand ramp had been badly damaged a few years ago in a snowstorm. Israel said the renovation was needed for safety reasons, pure and simple, and would in no way affect the Muslim holy sites. Complaints, even from some politicians within Israel itself, that the renovation work was ill-timed and not sufficiently well thought through, were brushed off. On the other hand, Muslim leaders within Israel and among the Palestinians maintained that instead of safeguarding the ancient site, Israel had a nefarious intent. The work could undermine the foundations of Al-Aqsa, and it showed Israel's true purpose, they alleged, that while the renovation work is indeed entirely outside the compound area, it's a prelude to Israeli plans to intrude onto the hilltop site. It's from there that Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, the same place which for Jews is the site of the first and second biblical temples. But is all that enough to explain the latest violent outburst? Does anything else lie behind it? Israeli leaders say political extremists on the Muslim side were trying to exploit the legitimate renovation work in order to stoke anger against Israel and lay false claims around the Muslim world. Taking up the cudgels, Ariel Dad, a nationalist Knesset member, urged strongly that the work not be stopped despite the protests. Whoever gives way over Temple Mount will give way over Jerusalem too, is his motto, just as he continued anyone who gives ground over Jerusalem will be giving ground over holding on to the whole of the land of Israel. And, wrote columnist Nadav Shragai, the bridge plan exposes the great Muslim denial, the denial of the Jewish bond to Jerusalem. Thousands of Islamic rulings, he writes, deny the Jewish roots in Jerusalem. They claim that the temple didn't even exist in Jerusalem, but in Nablus or in Yemen. Now, there clearly are those, perhaps even many, among Palestinians, among Muslims everywhere, who do not admit, do not want to countenance any kind of Jewish allegiance to the site, who contend that the biblical temples are a figment of the imagination. But setting such hard-line views aside, may there also be another backdrop for the vigorous Muslim opposition. Even if it's not totally rooted in fact, feelings about the site have certainly had a way of generating lethal confrontation. That is a fact. A decade ago, for instance, when Israel opened an exit to a centuries-old tunnel near the holy site, major riots erupted in Jerusalem and around the Palestinian areas, leaving dozens of dead in subsequent clashes. Then, in the year 2000, it was from there that the Palestinian Intifada uprising was sparked, following a controversial visit to the mount itself by Ariel Sharon, then the leader of the Israeli opposition. Given those outbursts, in point of fact, it's been quite remarkable that in the 40 years since Israel has held total sway in Jerusalem, after the entire city fell to Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War, a holding status with regard to Har HaBayit, Haram al-Sharif, has largely remained intact. Israel's defense minister of the time, Moshe Dayan, adopted a very pragmatic approach, partly because, according to Orthodox Judaism, Jews are forbidden from going up onto the mount until the advent of the Messiah. Dayan was able to institute a de facto arrangement whereby, while Israel retained overall security for the area, the Muslim religious trust, the Waqf, could continue to be in charge of day-to-day affairs in administering the site. And it's notable that the Waqf in no way led this past week's protests. But the 1967 formula goes only so far as it goes. Each side not really going as far as to acknowledge any validity to the other's ultimate claim to the holy area. For most Israelis, there's simply no argument. When the world sees only a most contested of landscapes, they see the old city as a whole as a legitimate part of Israel, part of the undivided eternal Jewish capital. To that, however, Palestinians, Muslims, the Arab world respond angrily. You see, it's all about control, they would argue. The old city, in their view, is occupied territory. So the ramp and the proposed new walkway up to the mount, seen by Israelis as a necessary physical improvement and a safety project, is seen by them as just another way of Jews trying to cement Israeli rule over the city. Back to the present and to the new dilemma for Israeli leaders: to go on with the renovation plan and to risk sparking another inferno, or to back down and to be accused of weakness, of surrender to violence. Enter Jerusalem's mayor, Uri Lupolyansky, with an announcement that the controversial construction work on the new walkway is to be put off to allow further public consultation and a full planning review to take place. That's a process that could take up to a year, and it would, most critically, also enable the general public, Jews and Muslims alike, to express opposition to the renovation plan. Some suggest that the surprise intervention of the genial Mr. Lupolyansky, himself an ultra-Orthodox Jew, is disingenuous. The critics say he ought to have intervened earlier to prevent the start of the work before full planning permission was given. But for all such carping criticism, the fact is that he has set a new benchmark, that this is a decision that will not be railroaded through, will not be unilaterally imposed, but will allow all interested parties to have their due say, that is, if they acknowledge Israel's planning process procedures. It seems a very important and a most timely intervention by the mayor. For while it in no way undermines the position that Israel, and Israel alone, should be responsible for administering the affairs of Jerusalem, it goes some way to acknowledging that there are others who also have claims to the city and need to be included in critical decisions as to the future of the city. It's a step away from absolute unilateralism, a basic cause, it seems, in fermenting antagonism. And it puts on the back foot the kind of approach which allows the ultras on both sides, those who say there's simply no room for two claims to the city or to the holy sites, to hold sway. Meanwhile, the archaeological work does continue, but there is much more credit now to Israel's contention that the renovation is good for Jerusalem as a whole, not an insidious attempt aimed at eventual takeover of Islam's holiest place in the city. Small clashes have persisted, with stone-throwing incidents reported in Jerusalem's Arab neighborhoods. Israeli police remain on high alert. But the decision of Mayor Lupolyansky, hitherto considered something of a political lightweight, could go far in playing down the conclusion of the BBC correspondent in the city, who, after quoting an Israeli official as saying that the violent outburst is really about the key question, who has sovereignty over the city, us or the Palestinians, concluded his report with the chilling phrase, "For both it is a matter of life and death." Surely what needs to be demonstrated is that this is not a matter of life and death, only of life. For that hope to be fulfilled, both sides have to be ready to reach the same conclusion and to act accordingly in favor of life in the Holy City.